for our lunchtime lecture series. My name is Martha Fisk. I'm on the education team here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Really happy to see all of you today. And before I pass off the microphone to our guest speaker, I wanted to recognize our team in the Office of Environmental Education with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. They coordinate this series that takes place every week, and it's a great opportunity for environmental educators, professionals, and the public to connect with experts in science, nature, education, and more. And after the presentation, we're gonna take questions, so please stick around so that you can share your questions or anything else that you would like to know. And we are also gonna be monitoring YouTube, so you can include your questions in the YouTube chat, and we will try to share those out as well. So, and now I get to introduce our topic for today and our guest speaker. So if I asked you what you think of when we talk about endangered species, you might first think of all of the really popular, well-known, large furry creatures, polar bears, whales. But there are so many amazing small creatures that we don't get to see and know about all the time, and that is what we are going to get to talk about today. So I would like to introduce Andy Wood, the director of the Coastal Plain Conservation Group, and he's going to share one of these special species with us today. So please join me in welcoming Andy to the stage.
Thank you much. I'm not going to stand down here, or do I have to be up on the stage? I'm okay here?
You're more
Great.
visible on the stage.
More visible?
More visible on the stage.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for coming out this morning on a cold, blustery winter day. Well, it's almost winter day, not quite. So again, thanks for the introduction. My name is Andy Wood, and I am based down on the coast, southeast coast of North Carolina, not far from Wilmington. And the star of the program is a snail, a freshwater snail found or known only from 4 distinct locations in southeastern North Carolina. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about a number of different things related to the snail, but we'll start by introducing its realm, which happens to be Earth, of course. More specifically, as I mentioned, southeast North Carolina. Drilling down a little bit further, you can see Wilmington is kind of in the middle of that oval. The snail, called the magnificent ram's horn snail, is known only from an area of about 150 square miles, and it's actually even less than that out of Earth's entire covering. It occupies the very smallest parcel of the planet imaginable for a species, other than you're probably familiar with the Venus flytrap, which has a range even larger than the snail's range. So we know this animal from, doesn't really show well on this picture, but that dark patch, oh, I got a pointer. This area right here is one of the ponds, one of the 4 ponds that this snail is known from. It literally is known only from 4 locations in the world. All of them mill ponds, which are ponds that were built with a dam back in the, depending on which pond you're looking at, typically going around to the mid-1700s into the early 1900s. So these mill ponds were associated with the rice industry in our coastal area. And in a very real sense, a mill pond is like, here's a bigger image of that pond. And what you'll see, this is all swampland around here. This was a little creek that beavers dammed up. And mill ponds are basically a surrogate beaver pond. By that I mean it's a dam created by people to create a mill pond, whereas the beavers create a dam to create their home pond. And the beauty of this snail story is, as we wiped out the beaver in the 1800s for their pelt, and also because they were flooding forest land. The beavers were pretty much wiped out of North Carolina, but we were building mill ponds at the same time to support the rice industry. So the magnificence of this snail's life history is it just moved into mill ponds after the beavers were gone, or as the beavers were disappearing. The snail was discovered, and this is what its habitat looks like before the beavers plug it up. The snail was discovered in the mid-1800s, described around, well, early 1800s, finally described around 1934 as a distinct species, and then it kind of got lost to science. Nobody kept up with it. And then in the 50s, I forgot to put a picture of a book. There's a book, You and Your Goldfish, and there's a reference to Planorbella magnifica in this little pocket guide book to keeping goldfish, because the snail used to be so common in Greenfield Lake in Wilmington that plant collectors for the aquarium trade in the early 1900s would collect the magnificent ram's horn with their plants that they then shipped around the world for the then developing home aquarium trade. The snail is very salt intolerant, and so it didn't live very long in home aquaria just because salt would build up in the water from a variety of factors, including food that we would feed to the fish. So the snails didn't make it in captivity very long. This is what their pond, the last pond we know of, that's the home of this snail in 1992, when after not having been seen by anybody since about 1957, I was at the time working at the aquarium as the education curator, and a friend of mine, Bill Adams, with the Corps of Engineers, a biologist with the Corps, he knew about this snail, and he wanted to know if it was still around. He knew it was rare, hadn't been seen for a very long time, so he called me up because he knew I liked little things and asked if I would be interested in joining him for summer of '92, and any day we had available that we could get out in the field and explore habitat that might be suitable for the snail. Again, kind of sight unseen. We had no idea where the snail might be. So we just spent weekends and afternoons, whenever we could, looking for this snail. And then on one day, we were in a pond in Brunswick County, and this slide's here because that's the tail of an alligator, and that's its head. And this was what we were dip netting in, trying to find this snail. And we disturbed several alligators. They all took off away from us. Alligators have no interest in people. But it was really fun looking for snails and bumping into gators in the process. And this is an image just to give you an idea of the habitat and what dwells in the habitat with these snails. Great blue heron wandering the shoreline. That was caught with a trail camera. But this picture right here, that's Bill Adams. And that's the magnificent ram's horn snail. This is the data sheet from August 28, 1992. And believe it or not, that is the first color photograph ever taken of a living, magnificent ram's horn. So my family and I have been engaged with this snail for a long time. Sandy and our two sons, Robin and Carson, have grown up. Our sons grew up with these snails, quite literally. It's not a well understood animal, and I'm the first person to take a color photograph of it. And that's not meant as a humble brag. The point of my program today actually is to reinforce in anybody watching the fact that one person, one family can make a difference. So when you hear somebody say, oh, I'm just one person, what can I do? Well, I kind of, with my family, single-handedly prevented extinction of a species. And if one family can do that, imagine what others can do. Not related to a species, but related to any number of things. So this is a Good News America story. Anyway, that's the first picture ever taken of one of those living snails in color. The data sheet was unremarkable. It's just kind of documents that we found something that hadn't been seen for a long time. And this is an image of the snail grazing. So a couple of pictures of the snail. And what you can see, it has tentacles. And at the base of each one of these tentacles, in the juvenile form, you can see a little black dot as its eye at the base of each tentacle. But as the snail matures, it loses its eyes, or they get covered over, they disappear. And so it's essentially blind, but maybe can see light and dark. They're most active at night, although I do see them 24 hours a day. They move around, but typically come out and move most at night, and that may be a strategy to avoid being eaten by predators. Turtles, crayfish, fish, sunfish. They have a lot of predators. Raccoons, just about anything that eats meat will eat a snail. This leaf right here is called spatterdock, and it turns out this plant is critically important to the snail's life history because they graze around, they move around, and actually we'll come back to that leaf, but you can see on this snail, that's a cluster of eggs, so of snail eggs. And yeah, I'm the first person to take a picture of magnificent ram's horn eggs, and the first person to take a picture of magnificent ram's horn hatchlings. How cool is that, that your claim to fame is a snail? I mean, you did mention the big glamorous stuff, but we'll come back to the importance of little things. So the snails are moving around, and they they move around and bump into one of these leaves. These three pictures here, actually all of these pictures, are from that August day in '92. We found the snail, and then we found eggs on the underside of spatterdock leaves. Cow itch lily, this is the leaf right here. It's one of our fairly common water lilies, and it's widely distributed. It's all throughout North America. And it finds its way into beaver ponds and mill ponds, which has been great for the magnificent ram's horn because it places its eggs on the underside of the leaf and takes the eggs typically 2 weeks or so to hatch, depending on water temperature. This is a snail. It's, again, kind of hard to see in this picture, but this is the underside of its foot. And what you're looking at is a snail skimming, following the surface tension of the water, or using the surface tension of the water to skim along. So its body, the shell, is underwater, but that right there is the air-water interface, and it's skimming along, hanging on the water surface. And as it moves along, you can you can trace its travels by a layer of slime that it leaves behind. So for any of you that are interested in therapeutics, there may be something in the slime of magnificent ram's horn, and I'm giving up probably millions of dollars that I would have gotten if I had done the research to prove that there's a compound in that slime that will do something magical for us. But maybe it's something you could explore and find some compound in that slime that may alleviate poison ivy, who knows. But you can follow that slime trail on the surface of the water, and maybe the snails do that as well. There's not a whole lot known about these animals. mainly because they've been in the captive care of one family since 1992 until about less than a decade ago, when the Wildlife Resources Commission took some animals from our population and raised them at one of their fish hatcheries in Watha. Those populations survived for a time, and then we were able to get more animals to the vet school here in Raleigh, and there's a population there now. So the really good news for me and my family is we are no longer the sole caretakers of what is now an endangered species. It only took us 30 years to get the Fish and Wildlife Service to list it as an endangered species. 30 years. Even though they knew the only animals left were in my captive care from 1996 until a few years ago, because in 96, Hurricane Fran struck our coast and allowed saltwater to get into the last known pond that supported these snails. Oh, backing up, sorry. This is a different species here that we also work with called Greenfield ram's horn. And yep, that's the first color photograph taken of a Greenfield ram's horn. This is a little better picture of it. You can see the beautiful shell. This was also described in the 1800s, but basically lost to science until a fateful day in '94 when a graduate student at UNCW who was doing snail surveys in Town Creek in Brunswick County just happened to find one of these. And it's an animal that had not been seen in almost a century, and she just kind of stumbled on it. This is a better picture, or a closer picture of it, and you can see the thing that's remarkable in the description in all of the texts about this snail is this chestnut-colored band. And then these little polka dots on here, leopard spots. It's a gorgeous little snail, and by little I mean really little. It's smaller than your pinky nail. This is an image of the Greenfield ram's horn habitat. Oop. And this is the magnificent ram's horn habitat for about 25 years. This collection of aquaculture tanks, these are all 300-gallon tanks equipped with spatter dock. They're all outdoors under a cover. The cover would come off during hurricanes, but that's basically what kept this animal going for almost 30 years. And then 2 years ago, we got a grant to build a more stable structure. That's my son, oops, sorry, that's Robin there and his friend Darwin Brandis, who are in the film industry in Wilmington, but as you may recall, we had a dust up with the film industry with COVID. They needed something to do, so we put them on task to build a new enclosure to keep snails and newts out of the tanks. Broken striped newt is a little salamander found in southeastern North Carolina. It's the southeast North Carolina version of the spotted newt. And these animals, those newts, have an uncanny ability to climb up the wall of these tanks. Even with that lip, somehow they find their way into these tanks. So we've now made a newt-proof structure. That slides in backwards, but you can see brand new tanks. These were made available from a grant from the American Fisheries Society. So we're grateful for that. Because many of the tanks, all of the tanks I've got are like 30 years old and in various states of decay. So we now have new tanks. So this slide here, while there's no reason yet to panic, I think it only prudent we make plans to panic. I'm putting this in here because the snail has a long history of strife. And that strife begins with dredging the Cape Fear River. As I mentioned earlier, the snail is salt intolerant. The Cape Fear River, the largest river contained entirely within North Carolina's boundaries, communicates directly with the Atlantic Ocean. So with every high tide, salty water creeps up the Cape Fear River. 300 years ago, the Cape Fear flowed 6 to 12 feet deep, all the way out to the ocean. Cypress trees, water lilies, those were all within sight of the ocean because it was a shallow freshwater stream. We began dredging it in the 1800s, and just as soon as it started getting dredged, salt water started creeping up the river, and all of the animals in the lower reaches of the river that are salt intolerant were wiped out, including the magnificent ram's horn and Greenfield ram's horn. So this is an image of one of the early dredges in the Cape Fear, and this is the consequence. So all of these are cypress trees, and this is a spring or a summer picture. So they should all be lush and green, but you see they're all dying or in various stages of death. And that's a consequence of salt accumulating in the soil. Cypress trees can get flooded once in a while with salty water, but when they're flooded every day with salty water, the salt accumulates in the soil and kills the tree. So, in addition to killing trees, it brings in things like blue crabs. This is a bottomland hardwood swamp. Should be fresh water. There should not be blue crabs in there. This is all spatterdock root right here, the rhizomes that have lost their attachment to the bottom because salt water is destroying the microbes that hold the soil particles together. And so the soil at the bottom of these bottomland streams just kind of fall apart, and the water lilies float to the surface and die. So, and this is spatterdock. That's where this is where these two pictures were taken as well. So there's still viable spatterdock, not today. These pictures are 20 years old. So that habitat is entirely different now, just in 20 years, because they've dredged the river from 6 to 12 feet deep to now it's over 48 feet deep. So you can imagine the slug of salty water coming up the Cape Fear River and creating havoc. In addition to dredging the Cape Fear River, we get struck by hurricanes. This is Hurricane Fran in '96, and just a few weeks before Fran, we got struck by Hurricane Bertha. And what I'm doing here, so this is '96, and this is one of the tanks next to our house. You can see we got windows boarded up. When hurricanes come, I have to cover all of the tanks with plastic because hurricane rain is salty. So all the tanks were covered with tarps, and of course, we got swamped with rainwater. The tarps went down into the pond water, and the snails, cruising along as though nothing was going on, they all found the undersurface of that tarp just wildly attractive. It was covered with little snails. So I've got a spray bottle, and I'm spraying the snails off of the bottom of that tarp. The things people do. This is a photograph of wood pellets. We're going through the threats to the snail here. These are wood pellets. And part of the reason we're dredging the Cape Fear River is to supply wood pellets to Europe that are being produced from trees that are cut in North Carolina. And you'll see, I don't usually put words with slides in a PowerPoint because that's confusing, but here's a word for you that you've probably never heard because I coined it. Eco-sustainable-biogreen. What does that mean? The definition of that word, propaganda for capitalism. At least that's the operating definition I'm using right now. Why that word? When you look at products in the store, how many products do you see eco? Now with more bio and more green and sustain. Really? Really? How can you prove to me your product is eco, bio, green, or sustainable? Sustainable is a term we use to describe something that we want to be environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable, something that can persist into the future. But in reality, we cannot prove scientifically if anything we do is indeed sustainable. And yet we throw that word out there randomly almost. The wood pellet industry even has a director of sustainability, even though in North Carolina we're cutting right now 60,000 acres of North Carolina natural forest every year to supply wood to be made into wood pellets that we ship out of Wilmington 3,800 miles across the Atlantic Ocean to England, where the wood pellets are burned to generate electricity for people to recharge their smartphone. Brilliant. That's a picture of a swamp that's been cleared. And this image is here to reinforce this whole thing about sustainable. In the 1800s, can't you imagine an officer of sustainability working for a whaling industry and just saying, yeah, we got whales galore. We can just continue on doing this. The only reason we have whales today is because we brought their numbers down so low, it no longer was economically sustainable to go chase whales. It wasn't that we didn't want them, it just wasn't economically sustainable. It wasn't environmentally sustainable either. So this is boiling whales. The good news for the snail. 2 years ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service finally relented after 25 years of lobbying to list the magnificent ram's horn as endangered. They finally agreed and listed it as an endangered species. What protection does that give it? Not really much, because it's essentially no longer in the wild as a consequence of saltwater intrusion. It's in captivity. But the good news is, at least it is endangered, as counterintuitive as that sounds. This is an image of a pond in Brunswick County near the Matsu Military Ocean Terminal near Southport. And they have this was a borrow pond created for something. And it turns out, miraculously, the pH of that water is close to neutral, which is what the snails want. And so this pond is a perfect habitat for the snail. It's not in the wild, though. So when we talk about, or when you hear, oh, the snail's been returned to the wild, not really. It's been put in a large pond. It's not connected to any stream, so it's protected from saltwater intrusion, but it's not yet in the wild. A small point. The other good news, here's our completed structure, safe now from dragonflies, which are another predator of the snail, turtles and newts. The other hopeful news is, as a consequence, as I mentioned earlier, of dredging the Cape Fear River, the Corps of Engineers and the State Port of Wilmington have contributed to thousands of acres of bottomland swamp being killed and harmed by saltwater intrusion as a consequence of dredging the Cape Fear River. This is the northeast Cape Fear River right here, which is a tributary to the Cape Fear. This is a block of about 3,000 acres of bottomland hardwood swamp forest that could be suitable habitat if a beaver moved in here and plugged up a portion of a small stream. It could create an impoundment that would be safe from salty water within the range known suspected range of the snail. And it would be protected from saltwater for maybe 50 years, 100 years, depending on the rate of ocean expansion. But the fact is, here's a chunk of land that I'm thinking the Corps of Engineers, out of the goodness of its heart, should mitigate the damage they've done by dredging the river by turning around and purchasing this private land to prevent it being turned into golf courses, which is what's on the plan right now, which doesn't really make sense because all of this floods right now. Anyway, so we have reason for hope. There's still habitat available that we could secure to protect the snail and everybody else that lives with the snail. And by that I mean lots of different plants and wildlife. This is the greenfield ram's horn I mentioned earlier. And we're gonna delve into a little bit of math just for fun. You're familiar with the Milky Way. This is an artist's conception of the Milky Way. We sit somewhere right around here, I think, maybe a little right there. Drilling down a little bit, our solar system. So moving away from snails to try to bring relevance to our species. Right now, Earth is spinning on its axis at about 1,000 miles an hour. And we are orbiting the sun at about 70,000 miles an hour. And the sun is orbiting the Milky Way at about 500,000 miles an hour as the Milky Way is circling around with another galaxy, moving through the universe in, so to speak, at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. I mention that because I think of Earth as a starship. A famous author has been trying to, years ago, wrote a book, Lives of a Cell. And he was trying to envision Earth as a living organism and gave up and decided, no, what is Earth most like? It's most like a cell, a single cell. We don't have time to get into that deeply, but when you think about Earth, think about the space station. When I think about snails, that little snail there on Earth, along with all of the other plants and wildlife that it lives with, I also think about nuts and bolts. If you're up in the space station, you're an astronaut sitting in the space station, and you're looking at the wall, and you see this thing here. It's one of those rivets. What does that do? I have no idea what that nut, that bolt, that rivet, I don't know what it's doing in my space station. So I should just pop it out. We don't need it. I don't know what it does. I don't think it's needed. Would you do that in a space station? Would you start popping out rivets only because you don't know what they do? So in the case of the snail, we've put energy into keeping that alive, thinking it's a rivet. It's helping hold together the ecosystem of this place here, which everybody in there regards as home. So in order to get back home, they take care of all those little rivets. There's a famous line, Stanislav Lech. Each snowflake in an avalanche pleads not guilty. This is a little cartoon from 1970, Earth Day, Walt Kelly and Pogo. And basically he was drawing attention to the hazards of pollution. And the closing line was, yep, we've met the enemy and he is us, which is true in some regards. So if I haven't gotten you with the nuts and bolts element of keeping the planet together, we're going to move into economics. When I was with Audubon, I was a lobbyist for about 3 years on Capitol Hill. Not full-time, but I would go up there to try to bang my head against a wall. And when I'm the first person to take a spotted turtle, broken striped newt, and magnificent ram's horn into the halls of the Senate. It was great. But every politician I met with would look at me and say, you know, Andy, we all care about the environment, but we have to take care of the economy. So we're going to close with a quick math exercise that hopefully will make the connection between that snail and the economy. Imagine a food pyramid. At the bottom of the food pyramid, or surrounding it, I should say, the one thing lacking here, this is all plant matter down here, plants and algae. And then outside the pyramid, sunlight, soil, water, and air. At the base of the pyramid, feeding on the plants, little tiny organisms, these are Daphnia, that are food for a small fish called mosquito fish, that are in turn food for another smallish fish, the sunfish, which is food for the largemouth bass. A 1-pound bass, as you can see in this illustration, has to consume 10 pounds of sunfish, which in turn have to consume 100 pounds of mosquito fish, which have to eat at least 1,000 pounds of little Tiaenses, not just Daphnia, copepods, amphipods, ostracods, all these little cods, all little squiggly things with lots of legs. Crustaceans related to shrimps and lobsters, mosquito larvae, all kinds of little things. So I wouldn't brag about a 1-pound bass. Think about a 10-pound bass. A 10-pound bass, in order to get to be 10 pounds, had to consume 100 pounds of sunfish equivalent, which had to consume 1,000 pounds of mosquito fish equivalent, which had to consume 10,000 pounds, 5 tons, the equivalent of a school bus in little Tiaenses, is required to produce one 10-pound bass. When you look at a food pyramid like this, multiply the amount of energy required to climb a step by 10 magnitude. So here is an image from a really great book, Understanding the Game of the Environment. And it basically is portraying the complexity of a pond ecosystem. And here is a ranger bass boat. That boat right now, 20 feet long, $107,000 for that boat. It's for sale right now. If you go to Concord, North Carolina, there is a bass store there. I won't name it completely. They should hire me as their spokesperson. Out in the parking lot is that bass boat. And in their store are millions of dollars of inventory that they will sell to you so that you can go out and chase, catch, and release largemouth bass. We don't eat largemouth bass. They're contaminated with methyl mercury. So we let them go. In North Carolina, the largemouth bass fishery is worth over $150 million a year. That's a pittance. In Oklahoma, largemouth bass fishing is worth nearly $1 billion a year. The same in Florida, Texas. In California, about 10 years ago, it was worth over $2 billion a year. Just largemouth bass. I'm not talking about trout, flounder, just largemouth bass. Is there money in the environment? Yes, but the currency isn't gold and silver. It's frogs. It's snails, Daphnia, sunfish, largemouth bass, great blue heron. Oh, and then that boat. So while I'm sure you have been hearing news about matters environmental, from climate change to sea level rise, when you hear somebody say sea level rise, I suggest changing that to ocean expansion. As the ocean warms, it expands. Because when you tell a politician, I'm worried about the ocean rising at 3 millimeters a year, they just don't get it. But imagine spilling 3 millimeters of water on your kitchen counter. What does it do? It spreads out. So when you think about ocean rise, it's really the expansion that is impacting us. So where to turn? Unplug, go outside, reconnect with nature. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but we know from medical research that being outdoors, standing under a tree, walking a busy thoroughfare lined with trees, your blood pressure still goes down. Even if you hear the traffic, being among trees is good for you. So I've been doing a lot of math trying to find relevance here. And one of the things that I'm really hoping we can start working on is unplugging. And it begins basically by turning notifications off. Turn off your notification so that you can actually be present where you are. And the reason that's important, globally, there are about 5 billion human beings spending, on average, 2 hours a day in social media. That generates 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year. It's no coincidence that as we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, increasing the greenhouse effect, the Earth is warming, and even social media is contributing to that. On average, 1 gram of carbon dioxide is produced per minute of social media time. The least social media, thank you for using YouTube, is YouTube. The highest is Facebook. So cutting away from toxic social media is good for you physically, mentally. It's also good for the planet. So I'll just move on from that. I'm not going to read it to you. And I think that is it, other than you got to have a quote from Thoreau. What's the use of a house if you haven't a tolerable planet to put it on? That's kind of the whole point of working with the snail, keeping the rivets, the nuts, and the bolts together to hold together Starship Earth. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. It's for the snail.
For the snail, for you and the snail. Any questions? I can bring the microphone over to you. Okay.
So in reference to the Cape Fear River specifically, is there anything that can be done to reduce the acclimation of saltwater as a result from all this dredging?
The only thing that could be done is to allow the river to fill back up. One measure that would make a huge difference that won't happen is there's a stretch about 15 river miles up from the mouth of the river where the intracoastal waterway was cut, creating Pleasure Island, creating Carolina Beach and Curie Beach, which were originally part of the mainland, but they're now an island because of one cut called Snow's Cut. And Snow's Cut is really responsible for bringing in a lot more salty water than just what comes in from the mouth. So if we could plug Snow's Cut, that would make a difference. But there really is no mitigation that can be done after the fact of dredging the river. That salty water is going to continue coming up. Already, Wilmington, you've probably heard about sunny day flooding in places like Miami. Well, we see that in Wilmington now. And not just on a full moon, but you go down to Water Street, appropriately named, on a high tide, and you'll see water bubbling up through the manhole covers. So already the river is there. And funny enough, they're rebuilding the federal building, which is located right next to the river, and acting as though, well, it won't happen here, even though it's already happening.
We have a question from YouTube. So would the snail survive even with the massive flooding that's occurred in the Northeast Cape Fear?
Most of the good question. The flooding in the Northeast Cape Fear that we've been seeing of late is primarily fresh water coming from upstream, flowing downstream. So the long answer is no, the Northeast Cape Fear is going to be inundated with salt water as well. So this is just to buy time, even if it's just 50 years, because that 50-year period will allow plants and wildlife to shift upstream in advance of what is the inevitably expanding ocean. So really, we're in a mode, I think, of let's just buy time. We need to, number one, humans need to push back from the ocean, kind of, period. Wrightsville Beach is going to be across the Intracoastal Waterway before too long. 10 years? No. 20 years? Maybe. 30 years? Probably. 50 years? Certainly. And when you heard about or read Inconvenient Truth almost 20 years ago, they were talking 2100. And most of us knew, no, we really need to be talking 2025. That was in 2006. And we already knew we need to be talking 2025. And here we are, 2025. And we already see the consequences.
Is the Greensfield Ramshorn still in Town Creek, or?
Good question. We don't know. I've been searching for it since '94. The last time I found it was 2008, and I've not found it since. We entered a drought in 2008 that persisted to 2012, and during that time, unfortunately, a hog farm was installed next to Town Creek, and the water just, the degradation of water quality was horrific. And so I've not seen the snail, haven't seen Greenfield Ramshorn in Town Creek since '08. But we're still looking. And so is the Wildlife Resources Commission, and for that matter, Fish and Wildlife Service, as they can put staff in there.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you left your lobbying side of the career into what you do now, and maybe the impact that lobbying groups have compared to the conservation group that you're with.
Nice question. I'm not sure I've ever been asked. So I was tapped by, well, I was at the time working for the National Audubon Society, and was tapped to help with climate and energy legislation from about 2009 to 12. And unfortunately, our efforts failed. All of the environmental organizations at that time spent roughly $48 million trying to get that legislation pushed through. ExxonMobil spent more than $90 million fighting that legislation. And so when I left Audubon, I got out of lobbying. And lobbying is such a dirty word because it's a dirty practice. we are all lobbyists, every one of us. If you have a voice, or if you think you have a voice, if you think you have a voice, you do have a voice. And one of the takeaways from that experience was, if you're going to communicate with a politician, make a phone call. They really react to a phone call. Sure, you'll get prompts from environmental groups to send this email to your elected policymaker. Emails, they put a stack of emails here I'm in favor of, and this stack over here I'm against. But when you make a phone call or a handwritten note, that really gets their attention. They typically equate every phone call equaling somewhere around 100 similar opinions. So if you call up and say, I love trees, they will assume there's probably 100 other people that love trees. So we're, each of us, a lobbyist. You can't go up against, as I tried, the pinstripe suits. I would go up there in my Red Wing cowboy boots and a jacket and a tie and look at the walls lined with $1,000 suits, thousands of dollars suits. And they would watch me come walking in to meet with then Senator Dole. And one of the most disturbing experiences was walking into her office, and I walked in through the door after going through a gauntlet of other lobbyists, and right here was a desk with a receptionist, and standing behind the receptionist were two lobbyists with full access to her computer screen. And I was directed to go to the right to the conference room, which I did, walked in, and as I was walking into that door, I heard one of those lobbyists ask the receptionist, "Who is that?" And if I was a braver person, I would have spun around and asked, "What business is it of yours?" But I didn't. I was being too respectful. I should have. So we're up against a lot of money. Even Ranger Bass Boats has lobbyists. So make a phone call. They get it. The politician gets it when they receive a phone call. And don't worry about talking to your representative. Talk to their staff. By and large, regardless of party, the representative or the senator's staff, pretty smart people. They're young people. They're sharp. That's who I worked with. Only rarely would I actually meet with a senator. I met with their staff or emailed and phone called with their staff who would convey whatever it is on your mind to their boss. So I don't know if I'm answering your question right. It's a very slimy business. It really is. Lobbying, that is. With all due respect to snails, which are also slimy.
Any other questions?
Complaints? Criticisms?
Thanks again. We really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
you sharing your time and coming all this way today to
Glad
join
to.
us.
Thank you.
And we want to thank our digital media team in the background, helping make sure all the technology runs smoothly. And we have another lunchtime lecture next Wednesday that we hope you can join us for. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you very much. Oh, I forgot to pass these around.